2.5 Father Returning Home by Dilip Chitre, Part 2. Hello dear students and dear friends. In my last video lecture, I started with the poem 2.5 Father Returning Home by the poet Dilip Chitre. I also discussed the icebreakers of this poem in my last video lecture. Today too, I will continue with this same poem Father Returning Home by Dilip Chitre, and I will introduce you the poet Dilip Chitre and the poem Father Returning Home. So friends, let's turn towards the introduction of the poet Dilip Chitre first. So open your textbook of English and see this introduction of the poet and the poem on page number 116, or you can also read it on the screen in front of you, or you can also read it on the screen in front of you. Dilip Chitre was born in 1938 and died in 2009. Was celebrated bilingual poet and translator with a remarkable work in Marathi and English. Dilip Chitre, who was born in 1938 and died in 2009, was a famous bilingual poet. Means that poet who writes in two different languages, or who knows two different languages very well and produces or creates his literature in two different languages. He was a translator with a remarkable work in Marathi and English too. His versatile creativity extends to painting, filmmaking, and his notable contribution as a magazine columnist. Dilip Chitre was a bilingual poet and a translator with a remarkable work in Marathi and English, but along with this, he was a great painter too, he was a filmmaker too, and he had his greatest contribution as a magazine columnist, or to the magazine columnists. Means he was one of the remarkable magazine columnists too. He received the prestigious Sahitya Akademi Award both for poetry as well as for his well-known translation work Says Tuka. Dilip Chitre received the prestigious Sahitya Akademi Award, which is awarded for a good piece of work of literature, and it was awarded to Dilip Chitre for his contribution in poetry as well as his well-known translation work Says Tuka from popular Abhangas, spiritual poems by Sant Tukaram. I repeat, Dilip Chitre received the prestigious Sahitya Akademi Award, which is given for the noble work of literature, both for poetry as well as for his well-known translation work Says Tuka, the translation of very famous Abhangas of the great Maharashtrian saint Sant Tukaram. Dilip Chitre has translated the Abhangas of the great saint in Maharashtra, Sant Tukaram, into English. And for his contribution to poetry and this translated work, Dilip Chitre was awarded with Sahitya Akademi Award. He had started a translation of literary work of saints in Marathi at the age of 16. One of the most important thing about Dilip Chitre is that Dilip Chitre started translation of literary works of saints in Marathi and into English at the age of 16. Exile, alienation, self-disintegration and death are observed to be the major themes of his works. Alienation, loneliness, self-disintegration and death are to be considered the major themes of his poems. Now let's turn towards the introduction of the poem. I will introduce you the poem. This poem, Father Returning Home, is taken from Traveling in a Cage. This is a collection of poem by Dilip Chitre with the title Traveling in a Cage. And the present poem, Father Returning Home, is taken from this collection of poem which was published with the title Traveling in a Cage. It draws a portrait of a suburban commuter. Commuter means who travels to and from, or who makes a journey to and from Delhi is called commuter. It draws a portrait of a suburban commuter. It draws the portrait of a commuter who lives in the suburbs or suburban parts of the major cities like Mumbai and etc. He depicts his dull, monotonous, exhausting and equally pitiable daily routine. In this poem, Dilip Chitre depicts the portrait of that suburban commuter. He is a dull, monotonous, exhausting and equally pitiable daily routine. It describes a forced alienation at home which is reflected through the stale food and lack of sharing. This poem describes a forced loneliness, a forced alienation, a forced loneliness, a forced isolation at his own home, which is reflected through the stale food and a lack of sharing of his feelings in the family. The children refuse to share their joys and sorrows with the hard-working father, who as a result is forced to retire into a solitude. His father or his own children, the own children of this father who works them hard in the city of Mumbai, refuse to share their joys and sorrows with this hard-working father, who as a result is forced to retire into solitude. Means even though the father works hard for his entire family and children in Mumbai or in other major cities, still his own children refuse to share their joys and sorrows with hard-working father. As a result, this father is forced to retire into solitude. This very painful loneliness is a symbol of man's isolation from the materialistic man-made world. And this is a very painful loneliness. This is very sorrowful loneliness, which is a symbol of man's isolation from the materialistic man-made world. Friends, along with these points, I would like to tell you some more points about this poem, or some of the more points related to this point or regarding this poem, Father Returning Home. Now, what is this poem about? Along with this introduction, you can add these points too. The poem Father Returning Home is about alienation, that is isolation, of the elder people in modern world. The present poem Father Returning Home is about alienation, that is isolation of the elder people in modern world. Secondly, this poem tells us about the isolation of old age. This poem tells us about isolation of old age. This poem highlights the poem Father Returning Home highlights the estrangement from family. The estrangement from family. This poem also indicates or highlights the loneliness in modern cities. This poem also highlights or indicates the loneliness in modern cities. This poem also shows modernization and the results of modernization. The effects, the good effects and ill effects of modernization. Another important point is this poem also indicates the loss of historical and cultural identity. Along with the good and ill effects of modernization, this poem highlights or shows the loss of historical and cultural identity. And the most important thing, that the setting of this poem is in Mumbai or of India. Means whatever picture is described in this poem is of the commuter in the city of Mumbai in India, who commutes through the local trains in the suburbs of India, in the suburbs of Mumbai and India. But whatever happens with this father or this suburban commuter, the father happens with all other suburban commuters in other different major cities in India who travel in the crowded local trains or in crowded trains. So this suburban commuter, who is the father and described in this poem, is the representative of all the hardworking father and the commuters living in the suburbs and traveling in the suburbs of the large or the major cities in India through the buses or the trains. So, along with the introduction given in the textbook of this poem, these are the important points which I would like to highlight and explain you about this poem. So, friends, we should stop here. In my next video lecture, I will read the poem line by line and I will explain you this poem line by line in detail. I rest here. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.